What is the quickest job you quit from? IT job where I learned on day one I was the only IT guy in the building, like 300 users. About 3 days in, some department manager asked if the 100 new desktops were going to be ready by tomorrow. No idea what he was talking about. I reached out to the corporate and their IT guy said something like, "Oh yeah, there's like $100 PCs in the warehouse you'll have to set up in Image. Forgot to mention that." I laughed, handed my badge to HR and walked on. On the way out, HR told me the last 4 people in my position had quit in the first week. Story 2. Got hired on at a major ski resort as a member of their marketing team. The first day was formal training where I was told to sit in on snowblower training. Long hours, middle of the night up a mountain in the freezing cold. Yeah, not my cup of tea. Maybe they were just doing cross-training, I thought. The next day, we are picking up equipment. I was expecting a walkie and my lift pass for being an employee. I was given Sub-Zero gloves, a heavy jacket, and multi-tools. Again, just thinking it was for safety. Got my schedule for the third day and it was scheduled for an overnight shift. Immediately went to HR. The response, that position, the marketing role, never existed. I quit on the spot. Story 3. Got fired after almost 3 days. It was a telemarketing job on my lunch break. During my third day, I got an email that was an acceptance letter to law school. This old dude that literally looked like Tom Smikowski from Office Space I'd met that morning asked why I looked excited and I showed him the email. And he said, "Go, leave this place and don't look back." He left the break room and about 10 minutes after my lunch, I was brought into the conference room and the boss said I was not a good fit and will fire me so I can file unemployment. I said, okay. 2 weeks later, I was living 1,000 miles away from my hometown in my first apartment alone, about to start a new career. I really wonder how that dude I met on that lunch break is. Story 4. I took a job in the produce section, closing shift at a grocery store. My first shift was a day shift training where the product guy showed me what he expected everything to look like when he arrived in the morning. I received a call from the manager saying not to bother coming in for the closing shift the next night because they were already staffed, but to come in for the following morning shift. When I arrived for the morning shift, the day shift guy was screaming and going crazy about the mess that the closing shift left. He assumed I was the reason and immediately screamed and started throwing produce at me, truly lost his mind. We had to be physically separated. They were going to fire him, but I hated the job, refused to give a statement, and quit on the spot. Story 5. I took a position in a factory that makes the industrial shelving for grocery stores once. At the orientation, the instructor asked me to take it easy the first day and equated it to football practice. Showed up on the line and see 7 dudes ranging from 20 to 40, all built like amateur boxers. Turns out the job was to grab these big 40-pound shelves, 2 at a time minimum, lift them above your head onto a moving hook belt for 12 hours, with only a 30-minute lunch break. My ride wasn't going to be able to pick me up until the end of the day. The next morning, I was physically unable to move. I couldn't have gone back to that job if I wanted to. Story 6. It's not crazy quick, but I worked at a convenience store at the University of Kentucky Student Center back in the day and left in 4 months, and that was my fastest. They had recently been bought out by Aramark and my manager was not surprised. I ended up reorganizing the stock in the basement to make resupplying easier, and then I was told that she would put me on a trial period for a promotion to assistant manager if I started ordering the stock resupply and maintaining the stock system. Decent pay raise. A month and a half later, I found out that she didn't have the authority to promote me. I told her I would work the remainder of the semester, 1 month, but only because I needed the pay and time to find a new gig. She was unrepentant, yelled at me after telling my coworkers, and she ended up fired a few months after I left. Quitting your job on the spot is a privilege that many don't have, although I have been close. Fun side story, the Aramark CEO visited the student center while I was waiting to leave. He scolded me because some of the sodas were not logo facing forward. I told him I wouldn't be doing that because it would take too much time and I was running the shop myself, so a trip to inventory meant the store was unmanned. The CEO was angry and my manager was mortified, lol. Story 7. I was 15 minutes into orientation and the lady said they run the drivers until they hit their 70 hours. So I raised my hand and asked if she meant if I was on the job site and ran out of hours if they were picking me up, or if I was close enough that I would go over, I would just be told I was done for the day. It runs until you are out of hours and it doesn't matter where you are, just put the truck in park and wait for a ride. Nope the heck out. It was driving cement mixers, pay was okay, but I'm not sitting on a job site, possibly 45 minutes from the yard waiting on a ride. If it were, say, 11 p.m. and I ran out of hours, I could be looking at punching in at 11 p.m. the next night to run nonstop until out of hours again. Story 8. I have 2 stories from my last year of college and first year of work. My 2-hour turnaround, I was working a dead-end call center job after college because I had to stay in a specific place, and most opportunities were elsewhere to help family. I was getting really desperate, not using my degree, and started applying to things I found in the help wanted section in the before times. I interviewed at this one company that did some sort of lead generation for network software, nothing I had any remote knowledge of. You called IT managers up, asked them some questions, fished around to see if they were interested in this well-known company's products, and then forwarded the lead to a sales manager. But it was a nicer office in a nicer part of town, not the warehouse call center I was in. They offered me the job on the spot and I took it. I went home and realized that it was confirmation I could get another job. I was hireable, and that relieved so much worry and panic that I realized this was absolutely not the job I wanted and I could do better. I called them back and quit before I'd even really started. I felt bad about it, but I would have been a bad fit there. I do credit that experience with breaking me out of a malaise. I now have a career I wanted in my field and I'm doing well. The one-day ditch. I was looking for some summer work my last year of college and saw an ad, again before times, in the paper for a public interest research group position. My degree was in a public service related field, so I was excited. While it was not any sort of policy or office job like I hoped, like working on a campaign or whatever, they recruited young people as street teams for fundraising. Not an MLM, it was straight pay with bonuses for the amount raised, and it was for a good cause, so I cautiously gave it a shot. They started the day getting us to memorize the script, at least it was an advocacy sort of thing. I think it was about pesticide use. But then it descended into some really sketchy group bonding, culty stuff, getting us excited about national meeting, a party sort of thing. Lots of hype, lots of emotional interaction to lure us in. Later in the day, they brought us all out in a big van to different neighborhoods with a handler for every 5 people or so and set us loose. After knocking on my 5th door and realizing how terrible I was asking old people for money, I just stopped asking for money and started talking to them about community issues. Just like what's going on in their community, what are their concerns, totally unrelated to the job, really just for my own edification, though a lot of people seem to like having a chance to talk to someone. At the end of the day, they did one-on-one pressure sessions with us and tried to make me feel bad for not having raised a lot of money. I didn't come back the next day and didn't take pay for that day. I respect the organization's aims, but their fundraising practices at the time were not great. Story 9. I was pricing home goods at Goodwill one summer, and the teenager who tested electronics had the most disgusting rap music ever playing, full blast, where customers could hear. I told the floor manager, and she seemed super scared of him and did nothing. So I went over and turned it down. I got called in by the main manager who told me that was none of my business. I was a high school teacher and was only working there for the summer. Teenage boys didn't scare me, and I felt the whole thing was ridiculous and beneath me, so I walked out. I also emailed the corporate because there had been a series of issues with this boy. For example, there were 3 elderly ladies sorting clothes and he'd go up and sniff them. Smells like crap, which of you crap in the bathroom? To which nothing was ever done. I was suspicious. Because of my email, corporate sent a team to investigate. Turned out the manager was using the boy to steal the good stuff instead of putting it out for sale. They both got fired. Heh. Story 10. I got a job at a lockdown facility for teens, which was a rehab place for kids who had records or needed mental health help. In retrospect, it felt kind of like the Provo Canyon school Paris Hilton was mistreated at. After a day of training, it became clear the adults didn't give a crap and were barely treading water, and the kids weren't getting any treatment that they were supposed to be getting. Felt like an unregulated jail. Left at lunch on day 2. A few months later, there was a massive riot at the facility, and the SWAT team had to be brought in to reestablish order. So glad I noped out. I feel bad for the kids there, and sadly, it's still open 20 years later. Story 11. Once, out of desperation, my friend's roommate got me a job at a liquor store. There was no training or anything, and the first day I was on my own. A few clients kept coming in asking for some of the pills behind the counter. I had no idea what they were talking about. About 3 hours into my shift, the owner came to check in on me, and I explained the situation. He told me they sell Viagra and benzos under the table, and I would have to do that as well. Shocked, I asked for a cigarette break, and as I was outside smoking, 2 cop cars pulled up with lights flashing and went inside. I just put my cig out, walked to my car, and drove away. I have no idea what happened, but no one ever contacted me. Story 12. Call center job for an internet provider. Day 1 out of training, and they promised us they'd be there if we needed them. 3 calls in, I'm getting screamed at. The policy was that we couldn't hang up no matter what. Found out from senior agents that if a customer asked for a manager, to basically ask one of them, because a manager will never come, and it's easier to lie to customers that you are one and that eventually you'll be able to do it too. The 3rd and final call I took, I hung up on the screaming customer, logged out, and emailed HR, asking how to send their equipment back. They never responded, but a week later, they emailed everyone in my training group, offering us all more training and a chance to show they can do better and give it longer than 3 days. Found out that basically only one trainee made it to day 3 before quitting too. I never did send their stuff back, not without trying. They called me 4 years later to ask me if I still had it and were annoyed when I said I didn't, because I moved and sent them one final email 3 years earlier giving them 6 months to arrange pickup before I moved. They told me I should have stored it somewhere. Story 13. I had one of those jobs in the mall where you try to find people to take surveys. The first 30 minutes was an orientation, then the manager took me out into the middle of the mall to try it out. I had to go up and get rejected by dozens of people continuously, but the worst part was I was exposed to a seedy underbelly of people in the mall that I never noticed before. There are basically super shady people that try to get you to pick them so they can take the survey and get the free stuff or a couple of bucks. The manager knew all the offenders and she would literally shoo them away like cockroaches. I quit after about 15 minutes of trying it out. To their credit, they sent a check in the mail for an hour of my time. Massive respect to anyone who can handle that much rejection. Story 14. Maybe a month, my nth dishwashing gig. I was probably, 19 hours were crap. The boss was weird. Final straw, she asked me to grab something from the deep freezer, then cornered me in there with the door closed. Started ranting about how she knows my brother isn't really my brother. We work together, different shifts. I told her we're 100% siblings, not sure how to prove it. She ranted a bit more and we just stood in silence. It was so awkward. Finally said she didn't care and let me out. My brother and I had a shift that matched up and I told him what happened. We walked out and while we were at the train station, she left a voicemail. Hey, you're fired, because my brother's voicemail was, hey. Lol. Side note, she won that cooking show where they have you gather your groceries from a fake grocery store in a limited time. Story 15. A babysitting job when I was 18. The most scared I've ever been in my life, for sure. I've done childcare for many families. Even at that point, I was quite experienced. But this family gave me the strangest vibe. The parents were describing their son in a very tiptoe sort of way. They asked if I had experience with autistic children, and I told them no problem. I was given no additional info, but I accepted the job, which was to be a weekly situation. The kid, he was 10, was not autistic, or if he was, that was not the problem at hand. I'm no psychologist, so I cannot obviously diagnose anyone with anything. But this kid had real evil in his soul. He harmed their pets. They had an elderly dog, a cat, and some sweet pet rats. He would hurt his little sister, 5, and leave bruises. It was a horrific evening in which I basically had to constantly stop him from taking his rage out on any living thing in his reach. It came to a boiling point about 2 hours in when he demanded a second can of soda. His parents had specifically told me that they could only have one each, which I relayed to him and told him to have some water instead. The kid walked into the kitchen, grabbed a steak knife, and just ran at me. I'm a large, athletic gal and he was like 10, so he only managed to cut me on the forearm before I got the knife away. I'm not ashamed to say I tossed that kid into a closet and locked him in there while I repeatedly called his parents until they finally answered, and I made them come home immediately. I chewed them out, then reported it to the local CPS for the sister's sake. I don't know what came of that, but I obviously never went back. Story 16. 20 years ago, I got a job at Sony on an assembly line putting together big screen TVs. The TV would get to me and I put on some plastic piece and put in 4 or 6 screws or something. There may have been a couple of other little steps or another piece, but that was a general deal. We had to wear hearing protection, cloth gloves, and a face mask to keep from spitting on the screens, and it was fairly loud. It was impossible to talk to anyone else, even if they were close enough to yell at. There was a big screen at one end of the line with the numbers of what was assembled that day. Pay was not bad if I recall, especially for the time and area, plus lots of overtime, 10 or 12-hour shifts. I did 2 days of training, which was super easy, basically learning how to use an electric screwdriver. I just spent 5 years as a mechanic in the military. The work was not physically demanding at all. I told them I was out at lunchtime and gave them the courtesy of finishing out the whole first day. It was the most mind-numbing, god-awful assembly line to perdition I've ever seen. Story 17. A FedEx warehouse job, and I quit during my welcome training video. My first day during the initial welcoming video, they told us we are not allowed to have our phones on us when we enter the building. To ensure we don't get distracted, I asked the training leader what happens if there's an active shooter in the warehouse. How do we call for help? She told me there are marked phones throughout the warehouse we could use. I told her in this day and age I don't feel comfortable nor safe not being able to call for help or at the very least call my mom to tell her I love her before dying. I got up and walked out of the training center and never went back. I received my first and final check in the mail from them about a week or two later for like $4. Made me chuckle. Story 18. I worked as an ophthalmic photographer, which means I photograph things inside the eye when people have wounds, tears, etc. inside the eye. On my second day at our retinal surgeon's office, we had 1 day post-op patients, meaning there wasn't going to be a lot for me to photograph because following retinal surgery, There's too much red liquid and other vitreous debris to see anything to photograph. Patients would still be sent to me, and I take a look through the lens, realize there's nothing to see, and send them on their way without photographing. Eventually, I guess someone realized that I wasn't taking any pictures, and I was told that I needed to call all the patients I didn't photograph back and have them come back in and take pictures. I explained that there was no view and nothing to photograph. I was told that it didn't matter and that if I tried to take a picture and had one in the chart, the office could bill for the attempt. I walked out that same day after refusing to do it. I'd been an ophthalmic photographer over 10 years by that time, including in larger university-based health systems, as well as hospital-based health systems, and this was absolutely not the standard of care. I should have reported the doctor to the board, but I didn't. I still live with that regret over a decade later. Story 19. Less than 1 hour. Showed up for a shift as a server at a Brazilian steakhouse. I walked in 15 minutes early and saw the employees were tending to a leak in the ceiling with a bunch of buckets and scrambling to figure out who was on for the dinner shift. No one on the team tried to show me around or even acknowledge I was there. I went behind the bar with a bartender who was working and asked if he could show me anything. He said maybe another day, he was too busy. I walked to the kitchen and said it's my first day. Asked to be shown stuff, they didn't speak English. I asked who the manager was, and when I was shown to him, explained it was my first day and I was eager to learn. He wasn't expecting a new employee that day and didn't have anything for me, told me to come back tomorrow. I said, no thanks. Story 20. The quickest I ever quit was a job I didn't know I had. I interviewed with a company to be manager of maintenance for a plastic extrusion factory. The interview went well. The two principals said they were impressed and would make me an offer shortly. Ghosted. I accepted a position at another company in engineering in the meantime. About 6 months into my engineering job, I got a call at home in the evening from the plastics place. Apparently, one of their primary extruders malfunctioned to the point it was completely inoperable. The principal told me I had to come in immediately to diagnose and repair said machine. I asked if he had the right number because I had never been offered the position. He stated that I was most certainly an employee of his company and if I failed to appear, he would terminate me. So I told him that effective immediately, I am resigning as maintenance manager for his company and hung up. Never heard from them again. Haha. And if you're enjoying the video too, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. I worked as a biotechnologist for a day. We were testing clotting on stink coat materials and needed a fresh supply of red liquid every day. My job was to start the morning going to the local cattle yard, collect samples, apply anticoagulants, and get to the lab quickly to run tests. What they skipped on the interview was how the samples were, well, collected. Now, I'm not very squeamish, been working in medicine for a while, and I firmly believe in the work of researching ways to reduce suffering. That said, I was expecting to do IV draws on healthy cows. The managers were expecting me to go in with a bucket. So, slaughterhouses are OSHA nightmares and sanitary nightmares and, well, nightmares. They are literal hellholes that should not exist. Put me off of meat to this day. Every moment was straight out of the jungle and not much has changed since Upton Sinclair's time. I noped out on the first day and reported to the meat facility the next. Will never look at a burger the same way again. Story 22. I arrived at a new consultancy role, FTSE 100 company, at 8 o'clock. HR told me that as they'd had a change of company policy and that I would have to sign their temporary staff contract and their terms of employment in place of my consultancy contract, which they'd already signed 2 weeks previously to commence the contract. On reading it, rather than my day rate for 3 days a week for 6 months, it was at their full-time employee rate pro rata, which was 60% less than my rate, and I would have to be on call for the other 2 days at no additional rate to me. I asked them politely to put it in writing, email would do, before I could sign it, as I wasn't sure how this would affect my tax position. The HR person did this whilst I sat there. Once it came through on my phone, I told them I wouldn't be signing as they'd signed my contract, and theirs was not at the agreed rate. She said I had to sign theirs, which would override mine if I wanted, quote, the opportunity of working for a company such as ABC. Well, I refused and was asked to leave at 8:25. I sued and won my contract value. Story 23. House cleaning. One day. It was only a tiny office with one receptionist who looked young but was heavily pregnant. The person who was going to work with me was only 17 and looked closer to 45. We rode with a couple of painters from the same business, I guess, in a worn-down station wagon to our first and only, I believe, house. The lady of the house just wanted some help with organizing and cleaning her kitchen cabinets. She folded her arms and watched us the entire time. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew we weren't there to dally. Once done, we waited for the painter's station wagon. After that, we went to a mid-range casual restaurant to eat lunch, which took all of the money I had left. I folded and rolled up the company t-shirt I was given and left it on the sidewalk outside the office door. Story 24. Prep cook at a golf course restaurant. I think I worked like total 2 days. I witnessed another prep cook leave out ingredients for crab cakes while he got distracted all day. It took him maybe 6 hours to make these crab cakes and never once put his prep in the fridge. Their method of making stock was also atrocious. They would pull the stock off the stove and put it directly into a 22-quart Cambro container and leave it on the floor of the walk-in without a lid. It took days for that to cool off while stuff dropped into it from above. I think my last straw was witnessing how not clean the dishes were after washing. I was a fresh graduate from culinary school, and the stark contrast of how clean we were at school and the restaurant that I interned at and how disgusting this restaurant was, well, was overwhelming. It's the only place I quit without notice. Story 25. Nannying job. Father worked from home. On the second day, I was in the baby's bedroom reading to her when he opened the door to a delivery person who had dared ring the doorbell and full-on started psychotically screaming a number of other expletives. It went on for like 5 minutes, a few feet away from me, and I tried to stay calm and keep the baby calm. Fortunately, she didn't seem to notice. I was alone with this man and this baby all day while working, so that night I sent a text to the mother reciting exactly what he had said and said I would not be coming back because I was uncomfortable. She tried to convince me otherwise. I felt bad for her. She clearly was married to a psycho, but I didn't want to be in that situation. God forbid I made a mistake and he went off on me like that, and he felt comfortable doing this the second day I was working there? Story 26. Postal service. I worked there for about 2 months. I never had a schedule. They'd either tell me the night before or text me in the morning. I was constantly made to work at other post offices after my shift was done, usually working about 10 hours a day. Sundays were mandatory. We did contracting for Amazon. The union was very clear that it couldn't do crap for anyone new, and the NALC president was useless. They had a 2-tier system that made sure the old guard got paid old school union wages, while the new tier was sold out for a weaker bargain. I was consistently told not to get bitten by a dog because I'd be fired, so USPS didn't have to cover the medical costs. I'm a retired Army combat vet, and I spent years of my life working 12+ hours a day, 7 days a week. I know what good and bad leadership looks like. The USPS is a toxic dumpster fire. It's almost deliberately bad to keep people from staying long enough to get any kind of benefits. Louis DeJoy is a crap leader, and so is Brian Renfro. It's a miracle that our mail is delivered on time. Story 27. Literally, McDonald's. My first job when I turned 16, I had no clue what the heck was going on half the time because nobody actually wanted to train me. I went up the road to a bowling alley and did a job interview on the spot after asking for the manager and got hired as backline kitchen staff making pizza while blasting on a Bluetooth speaker. I went back to the same McDonald's and dropped off my uniform and walked out while my manager was yelling at me, telling me I couldn't quit like that. I said, "Watch me, bro," and I left. In total, I worked there for about 10 days and screwed off. Now I'm a disabled Army veteran and a truck driver at the ripe old age of 23. Story 28. Truck loading job for Frito-Lay. Went through 2 entire shifts of just HR training and watching videos. First real shift, my first few trucks to load were at the opposite end of the building, which took, no joke, 20 minutes to walk to. Had us literally running in and out of trucks so we could load 50-foot trailers efficiently. 90-degree weather with no cooling of any sort, sprinting with 50+ pounds of boxes, tossing them to stack up to the roof of the truck. Had a massive alarm that played when it was lunchtime. Turns out you're automatically clocked out when that alarm rings. Took 40 minutes of my 30-minute unpaid lunch break just walking to and from the lunchroom. Got told by my shift lead that letting it happen again would get me a write-up. I walked out as soon as he told me that. Not worth the $15 an hour when the McDonald's down the street was hiring for $23. Story 29. 2 days, I applied for a job titled Front Desk Booking at a local upscale hotel. I got a reply back not from the hotel but from a vacation company that rented out of that hotel. We had just moved 1,000 miles and I needed a job. I went to the interview. They told me it was sales. I was afraid of not having income and the job market was extremely competitive, hence why I was unable to line up a job before moving, so I said yes. It was a timeshare company because, of course it was. I thought, well, I need a job. The first half of the day was touring the hotel and sitting through the presentation given to prospective, quote, clients. I'm telling myself, I need work. The second half of the day is training, which included multiple readings from the book, The Secret. They were so into it. I told them they could keep the day's pay and thanks for the opportunity. I did not tell them their timeshare cult gave me the heebie-jeebies. Story 30. This really rigid call center for catalog orders? Yes, this was a while ago. Thought it would be chill and just taking orders over the phone. However, you were forced to do a hard sell for magazine subscriptions after taking the order. Also, it was no reading, no crosswords, and definitely no outside internet type of job, so you'd sit around for like 30 minutes or so, as it hadn't picked up for Christmas yet. Lasted about 2 weeks, got a much better temp job at a cell phone call center, and got to read and smoke grass on the job. Story 31. A dishwasher job. I lasted a weekend. It was harsh right out of the gate. One of the cooks said the position will be the hardest of any other restaurant dishwasher, and well, I believe him after what I was expected to do every night. The moment I got there to the moment I left, I was working my butt off. I had to work in a small, narrow room with a big fan as the only ventilation. There was already a pile of dishes and pans to wash when I got there, too. The sink was disgusting. It had like 4 layers of food traps and would still get plugged up a bunch. 90% of the giant pots I got were crusted with sauces and crud that I had to scrub that crap down as best as I could. Then when it was closing time, the cooks only had to wash the stoves and countertops. Everything else, they dumped onto me. So I had to clean all the floors and degrease them and then take out all the trash and refill them, and I had to sweep the floor and put all the dishes back. All by myself, as the managers, boss, waitresses, and cooks have already left like 30 minutes after closing because they basically just had to wipe down and give everything to me. I wouldn't get out until 2 a.m. All for minimum wage too, so I said screw it and quit Monday morning. Story 32. I don't even remember the name of the company, but they manufactured parts for the railroad. Was job hunting right out of high school, 1993-ish. Had a friend get me an interview with a place that needed help. The interview was on a Saturday morning. It lasted about 30 minutes, and I was told to be there at 7 a.m. Monday. So Monday rolls around, and I show up at 6:30 a.m. and have to drive through a picket line. Evidently, the union labor force had walked on Friday, hence the Saturday interviews. They were hiring scabs so they could continue to meet quotas. I just acted lost, did a U-turn in the parking lot, and got the hell out of there. Never even reported for my first day. Story 33. I worked at a Pepsi plant in Oahu, and the conditions were unbelievable. The underside of the conveyors were slimy with mold, and cans were stored and moved open side up without being cleaned before filling. The machinery was constantly breaking and was only ever patched up just enough to keep moving. The company had no manuals for the machines, and the maintenance tracking system was a disaster. If you signed off on a recurring task, the system would clear it permanently instead of rescheduling it for the next interval. So by the time I started, some essential maintenance hadn't been performed in over 6 months. Training was non-existent. One time, the company flew in technicians from the manufacturer, but then refused to let them actually access the machines to show us how to work on them. They essentially blew $50,000 to give those techs a week-long vacation. The hygiene was even worse. My lead once broke the seal on a filler, exposing it to open air and contaminating the container. He realized he had done it with a dirty screwdriver, so his fix was to spray the tool with sanitizer and keep sticking it back into the product. Production saw this and told everyone to keep going anyway, claiming the soda was so acidic nothing will survive in it. The exact thing the in-house engineer had warned them never to do. The final straw was watching my lead jump into an operating machine to access a high-voltage control panel without following the lockout, tagout procedures. His excuse was, "I'm only doing it because I know how the machine works." This happened the very same week the company sent out memos about a worker at another location losing fingers for skipping LOTO. I already had another job offer lined up, so I went to my computer, sent a resignation email to my boss detailing every failure he had refused to correct, and CC'd all the other new hires. I left my badge on the lead's desk and walked out. My boss called me before I even reached my car, upset at how I quit and wouldn't stop pestering me until I told him I had a better job waiting. Oh, and one more thing, Pepsi concentrate smells exactly like retch. The entire filler side of the factory would reek of it whenever we ran a batch. Story smells great though. Story 34. In college, I found a dishwasher position at an upscale restaurant. I interviewed and they called back saying they'd love for me to come in for my first shift the very next night. I went in, was shown to my station, and got straight to work. I had a few questions about where certain items belonged, and during these slower moments, I took a few minutes to introduce myself to my new coworkers. I clocked out at the end of the night, and the manager told me she'd call me about the week's schedule. A few days turned into weeks and I heard nothing. Eventually, I went in to pick up my paycheck for that 8-hour shift. They looked at me and said, "Oh no, that was an unpaid trial shift and we decided to go in a different direction. Thanks for your time." I left the restaurant stunned and angry. A few days later, I was talking to my mother on the phone and told her what happened. She said, "That's illegal. What's the name of this place?" "Okay, I'll call you right back." It turns out she called the restaurant pretending to be our family's in-house legal counsel. She informed them that she would be contacting the Better Business Bureau and the State Labor Board immediately. Needless to say, I went back the next day and a check for $58 with my name on it was waiting for me. That was the hardest I've ever had to work for a bottle of Jack Daniels. Story 35. I work in IT counseling and have managed projects for thousands of clients over the years. In all that time, I've only ever walked out on 2 projects within hours of the first day. The first client simply wouldn't let us work. They wanted our team to work hand in hand with their employees on every single line of code. We explained that there is a significant extra charge for that level of support and that the project timeline would inevitably slip. The client refused to pay the surcharge and rejected any extension to the timeline. We walked out at 10:15 a.m. It was a relatively small project, only $6.5 million, and we saw them in court 14 weeks later. We walked away with a $200,000 payout. The second client was a different story entirely. Within the first few hours, a creepy employee began hitting on 2 members of my team. explicitly asking them about intimate acts. We immediately called our primary contact to report. The contact brushed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just Mary. Her dad is a major investor, so just play along." That obviously wasn't going to fly. We exited the building after lunch and notified our legal team. We triggered our exit clause and closed out our side of the project. Eventually, we did return to finish the work, but only after Mary was offered an opportunity to work out of a completely different office. Story 36. After walking away from an apple processing plant after just 2 days, I took a painting job that lasted all of 2 weeks. It was a disaster from the start. My trainer was deeply religious and took personal offense to the fact that I didn't go to church. He would frequently walk past me and mutter that I was taken by the devil, and he even tried to shame me to the manager for my lack of faith. The manager wasn't any better. He was wildly unfair and seemed to enjoy setting me up for failure. He would often take my tools to demonstrate a technique, then ask me to repeat what he did without actually giving the tools back. When I stood there empty-handed, he would chastise me for being unprepared. The final straw came on a 105-degree day. I was asked to work on the roof, and as I started to bring a tarp up with me to protect myself from the heat, the trainer stopped me. He told me to leave it down, claiming I didn't need it. Within minutes of being on that blacktop roof, which had to be at least 130 degrees, the heat started burning my hands and knees pretty badly. As I was struggling, the manager climbed up, saw the state I was in, and tossed the tarp towards me. He looked me in the eye and said, "You have to start helping yourself out, man." And that was it for me. I'm an accountant now, and I thank God every day for my desk and my great bosses. Story 37. I got lied to about the job. I interviewed for a part-time customer service position that I could do while attending uni. My first shift had me shadowing a staff member on calls, and they were doing outbound sales. So I asked if I'd been assigned to the wrong team as I applied for a different role and was told no, at which point I handed them my badge and thanked them for wasting my time. I think I was there for about 2 hours all in. I was also suspected of walking out of another job during my lunch on my first day, but I was actually locked in the kitchen at the end of the building as the door mechanism disintegrated while I was in there. There was a moment of making fun of me up until the carpenter that got me out also managed to lock himself in the room despite knowing the lock was messed up. Story 38. Telephone sales. The company had bought lists of people who had bad credit. Our job was to cold call them and tell them we were in a position where we could get them a loan. Then we'd give them a premium rate of £1 per minute phone number to call, which was the application hotline. Each application took 30 to 45 minutes and ended in them either being rejected or offered an insanely high interest rate loan. And then the person that managed to get the most, quote, callbacks would be rewarded with a little cash bonus or sometimes champagne, etc. And people who weren't getting any would be pressured and told that the people taking the callbacks wouldn't be able to feed their family as they didn't have the opportunity to earn their commission because of us. This was the late 90s, and although I was young and with an as yet unrefined moral compass, even I could see what a disgusting practice it was. I just told my manager on the second day that I didn't feel I could do the job because I didn't believe in what I was selling, and I left. I was, and still am in many ways, a non-confrontational, take the path of least resistance kind of person, but I remember this as the first time I really took a clear moral stance on something. Story 39. I went to work for a company that was going to sponsor my journeyman electrician license. They assigned me to work with Bruce on site Monday through Thursday, home Friday morning for 6 months. Bruce was an unhappy man. An example would be, "Hey Bruce, where do you want this ladder?" "Put that end down and that end up and put it down there, idiot." Bruce expected to yell at me all day, and then I'd sit with him in the hotel bar after work, drink, and watch sports, which I didn't because I don't drink, don't watch sports, and didn't like Bruce. It was a prevailing wage contract, $34 an hour to earn my license. After 2 weeks, I went home and my wife said, "You're miserable, quit." On Monday, I went in and asked them if I could work with a different master. They said no. The manager was like, "In life, sometimes you gotta put up with people like that." No, sir, I don't. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.